evening. This is Carla from MindPlore with Carla and Friends, and I have an extremely wonderful group today. I have Jeanne, who has been helping me out recently. I have the famed Pakistani Kamran Z, Rizvi. And of course, Neville, who we haven't seen for a long time. But I am so happy to have him that I am smiling because I have him. My nose is very itchy this morning. In any case, we are talking about mindsets and managing our mindset. Because if we have a positive mindset, believe it or not, it changes our whole world. And if we have a negative mindset, the world becomes very negative. It's how we think that makes the world how we see it. Having said that, Jeanne, can you please take over?
Sure.
So I do what I said I would do for you guys.
I can do that. Thank you, Carla. And it's going to be a great discussion, I can tell. But I have a couple of thoughts that I want to share. Quotes from Louise Hay. She says, every thought we think is creating our future. And that's something we've talked about in the last couple of episodes. And it's a very strong thought. But I want to follow it with another Napoleon Hill quote, and that is patience, persistence, and perspiration make an unbeatable combination for success. And I think that last one, perspiration, is important to underline, because as much as we change our thoughts and we look towards new goals and we do everything we can to work on our mindset, we also have to work on the work. So with that, let me just throw that over to Neville. How are you? What do you think about that, Neville?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, unless you put the effort in, you don't get anything out. So, and we talk about practice, and more practice. So I like the Hill quote, because perspiration. Yeah, I mean, that's perspiration, as in not getting necessarily wet under the arms, but actually physically being, mentally tired. I think perhaps I would call it, because you can be mentally and physically tired knowing that you've really put in the best effort. So yeah, I mean, it resonates with me. I'm sure it resonates with anyone that's been successful, frankly, because they do know that you need to put something in to get something out.
Yeah, it's it kind of goes along with anything you do is 10% talent and 90% work. Kamran, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, mindset brings to the fore the very essence of how to live a good life. For example, I am in Pakistan, and when I came here, I discovered, of course, that there are several challenges in this society. And when I spoke to the gentry in this country, I asked them, what are the core problems in our society? And the one word that kept coming up, mindset, attitude. And this is where I'm so glad that Neville is also with us, because he speaks of MindFit as a process and a very, very useful discipline. And no one can deny the importance of having the kind of mindset that helps us grow, develop, not only contribute, but also have a fulfilling and a meaningful life. So from that standpoint, I think the theme that you have set, Carla, and you have set, managing our mindset, I think has different layers and levels. And one level, of course, is what has become very popular. And I was just refreshing my mind with Carol Dweck's work, where growth mindset is contrasted with the fixed mindset. And in that, you find that a growth mindset says that I can learn anything I want to. And contrasted is I'm either good at something or I'm not. So this tyranny of the or is a fixation of the fixed mindset. Then the other aspect I feel when we look at ourselves and our situation, and you were talking of perspiration from the Hills quote, is that when I'm frustrated, I persevere. And I think frustration here is seen in a very positive light, because where I am and where I want to be, the gap is what causes the frustration. And it's the perseverance and perspiration that gets us to the destination that we're looking for. And it's the process that we need to focus on. Again, growth mindset focuses on challenging oneself, whereas when we are in a fixed mindset, we are in a comfort zone and we'd rather be left alone and not be asked to do much, and challenge is completely out of the question. And then we look at the other dimension where failure is very much a part of life, and people with a growth mindset look at failing as a process of learning. So either we win or we learn. We don't essentially come to a halt. And when people are with a fixed mindset, they tend to fail and conclude that they are no good. And I think that is where we come to a halt. A growth mindset, again, there's another very simple statement which I feel ought to be refreshed. Tell me I try hard. And the other dimension which I found in the growth mindset is if you succeed, I am inspired. So looking at other people doing well and getting inspired by it is, of course, a very healthy sign. But if you feel threatened by someone else's success, that is a fixed mindset. So these are some dimensions. Self-assessment can guide us as to where we are at any given time. And my effort and attitude determine everything. And this is where I would like Neville to also shed some light on it. And Jeanne, you too, because you work with so many organizations and you are often alluding towards this. So this was my early thought, which comes to the traditional and a very, very useful kind of a recall that we need to have as far as mindset goes, the growth mindset dimension. But then in addition, I've also come to realize that we can either have a scarcity mindset, or an abundance mindset. And I feel that abundance mindset gives us the resourcefulness to make deeper connections with nature and with people around us, virtually or otherwise. So that in itself is something to consider. And finally, I feel that nowadays there's a lot of talk about eternity, eternal mindset. And when we look up different talks, particularly by Adam Hall and others, they're nowadays talking about the 5D phenomena, and the 3D phenomena. I find that 3D is the conventional life, a life of division, of strife, of competition, of he beat me, I beat him, conflict, which is not getting anywhere, getting stuck in status quo and going round in circles. That is a very frustrating, stressful kind of a world that we have created for ourselves. And that is the three-dimensional world in which we find ourselves. And to step out of that, the fifth dimension takes us to the eternal, the spiritual, and the divine. And I think that is something that has really captured my imagination. And it is using intuition, imagination, and our right brain, the creative side of our mind, and finding a greater means and way to discover what's within us so that we can call out from within the infinite possibilities that we represent, and also sense a connection with humanity overall. And rather than looking at diversity as divisive, looking at it as a huge point of celebration where there are several collaborations and synergies that can be achieved.
Well, that really digs into mindset from a lot of different perspectives, and I really appreciate that. One thing that you said earlier on is that, I think it was in the 3D example, that we connect and compare ourselves to each other. And I think that that's detrimental to our own mindset. it's like when I used to play golf, my father, I learned to play golf so that I could see my father in his retirement, because that's all he did. And, I'd go home to visit and he'd be like, see you later. I've got an early golf tee time. And both days he would be doing that. So I learned to play golf. And the one thing he stressed was not to compete with other people, because golf is a game about competing with yourself. And I would get really frustrated until I played with my brother, who had a way of slicing and going way off into the rough. And then I would start laughing and say, I got you on this one. But that's sibling rivalry. But what I learned from the game of golf is no matter what's going around outside of you, it's really an inner game. It's you and the ball, you and the ball. And if you lose that inner game, you basically should just stop playing, because you're going to be adding more and more strokes to your scorecard. That said, the other thing that stuck out at me is the difference between a growth mindset and somebody who's stuck. When there is a failure, one sees a lesson and one sees an obstacle. Then that's one of the things that I like to mention to folks when I'm working with them, when they start talking about, I screwed up, or I couldn't do this, or I totally blew it. And I would ask the question, it's a simple question: was there a lesson in there for you? And that changes how they start to look at things. And that's really, as coaches, that's what we need to do, is get people to change their perspective just a little bit, right? Neville, after getting this great dissertation from Kamran, which is great, Kamran, I see Mind Fit map on your background. So where does this take you in the conversation?
Well, firstly, what I remember, before we part today, remind me to send you a copy of one of the chapters in our golf book.
Okay.
It's called "Is Your Mind Fit for Golf? The Missing Link to Your Success." And I'm sure you probably read The Inner Game of Golf by Tim Galway. It's a bit old now and it's a bit of a hard read. But anything, leadership, people skills, it's all an inner game. It's what goes on between the 5 inches between our ears. And Cameron mentioned Carol Dweck. I mean, she's done so much for this arena, particularly in young people, interesting enough. And in the many conversations that she and we have had on the subject of growth mindset, she has no idea how and why we get so quick results, because she knows it takes time. But let's just refer to the map behind. There's a lot of research in this map. It's got 120 individual theories, but it's only taken the nuggets out of it. And this map works every time. Whatever you do, you've got 3 options in your behavior. It's either a can-do behavior, a can't-do behavior, or a won't-do behavior. That's your mindset. And there we go. Carla's dog is saying that's right, So we've even got dog can understand, okay? And it's so easy to understand once you know about it. And to relate this to Cameron introducing Carol Dweck, a growth mindset is a can-do attitude. But a fixed mindset needs to be split into 2. So it's either a very defensive attitude or it's a I can't be bothered attitude. The defensive attitude is a won't do, which tends to be a very toxic, dictatorial arena. And a can't do is I screwed up. It's my fault. I did it wrong every time. And interestingly enough, I asked the pair of you a question. What proportion of the working population in the world sits at the top? What percentage do you think? Simple question.
1%.
What percentage of the global working population?
1%.
This is a research done by Gallup every year, interesting enough. And they go across all industries, all disciplines. So what did you say, Cameron? Sorry, didn't hear that. I was talking.
1%.
1%? So what do you reckon, Jeanne? More than 1%? Less than 1%?
I think maybe
5%. So my point is, you already both know it's low. Because of your experience, you know it's low. Interestingly enough, it's about 13%, which might surprise the pair of you. But Cameron, if you thought it was 1%, the 13% that have got it are still doing what you think is only 1%'s work. Okay, so I think that's fair to say. But what I'd like to do is to go back to when we developed this growth mindset, because Cameron and I have on many occasions we've spoken about this thing up here, the brain, being like a computer, and it depends on what software we put in and what malware we've got as to how that computer works. Fortunately, that computer's smart enough to help us breathe, help us smell, help us listen, even if we don't listen very well, and help the blood circulate. So it's doing things automatically for us. Thank goodness it does it automatically, because lazy people would never make the blood flow, would they? Let's face it. They'd be constantly pumping at their heart or getting a pacemaker. So, and it is funny, really, when you think about it. But let's go back. Let's take it back to when you're first born. Do you think you're born with a growth mindset, a fixed mindset, or no mindset at all? What do you think?
Well, I've always thought we start with a blank slate, and we're making choices from the very first moment. And it's, our parents have a lot of influence on that. So it's one of the things that when I was a young mother, I made a choice. There were things like the words "you were stupid" would never come out of my mouth when I was talking to my son, and things like, he was diagnosed hyperactive, and they wanted to put him in special ed, and he felt pretty stupid, to be honest with you. And I was like, no, you just learn differently. And in fact, you're in the top 10%, but you learn so fast and so differently, you need to learn a few behaviors to be able to fit in. So I kept changing his perspective to be more about, to be more positive and to let him grow. I chose not to break his spirit, but to put up with all of the frustration that goes with having a hyperactive child, because they're kind of hard to rein in. It's like herding cats, but I just knew intrinsically that would make a big difference in his life.
It certainly does. I mean, we're interesting enough, we're actually born, and the neuroscientists have proven this in the last 5 years. We're actually born with a positive bias. So I like that. In our brain, on day one, we have got a positive. Everyone has a positive bias, and when you think of it, that's got to be right, because the brain is doing bodily functions that we haven't really learned how to do. In some respects, our mother has helped along the way for 9 months. But the brain, once you're born, the brain takes over. And it starts all of the functions pumping. But it's been proven, as I say, a lot of medical research has been done on this, but the neuroscientists now all admit that we're born with a positive bias. And then what happens? You meet your parents. Good luck with that one. You meet your teachers. Good luck with that one. You meet your uncles and aunts and your parents' your friends' parents. Good luck with that one. And it's the environment that literally makes us who we are, in some respects. And it's a question of we've got our brain, we've got a PC, and all of this stuff is coming from all over the place. This software that we're acknowledging. But if you take the next step, and I'm talking about walking now, we must all have a positive bias when we start to walk. Otherwise, we'd never walk.
That's true.
And if you look at a 2-year-old opening a present, a gift, I mean, I can't. I'm 62 years old. I can't remember when I was 2. It's a long, long time ago. But if I'm like any other 2-year-old I've seen, you rip the paper around, you break the box open, you play with the toy for about 20 minutes, then you throw the toy away, and then you play with the paper and the box and the wrapping.
I have one correction. You pick out the toy and you play with it for about 2 minutes.
Oh, okay, fair enough. We're back in the sort of small percentage of can-do people here. But you're probably right, you know. And some kids get fed up very easily. But their imagination, Cameron, you mentioned imagination. Imagination runs rampant, you know. And all of a sudden, this box becomes a castle. You know, it becomes a ship. It becomes a shipwreck. It becomes an island. And the thing is, we never really know what goes on in a child's mind until one of them goes, "Avast ye, me hearties," and, you know, starts to become a pirate. And then you've got an idea of what's going in their head. So even at 2 and 3 years old, we've got a growth mindset. But what turns the growth mindset when we're 2, 3, maybe 4 into, let's say, 10% of the world's population having a growth mindset when they're older? What happens? And that's what I've been fascinated by.
Yeah, there's a lot of socialization that goes on, and a lot of competition as well, especially like in the school, you know, the grading on the bell curve and all that, you know.
I'm an accountant and I'm a mathematician and I'm an economist, and you know, bell curves, frankly, they should be thrown away, kicked out the door. And as you said, you know, your father was absolutely right. You're not playing against anybody else. You're playing golf against yourself.
Right, but we live in a world of one of my friends always would bring up zero-sum game.
Zero-sum game, yeah.
And, you know, somebody's got to lose for me to win. And that's probably been the kind of the driving force in me wanting to be more of a coach. And when I work with executives, like, no. There's plenty of work out there for everybody. There's plenty of things out there for everybody. We just need to find our niche. You know, it's not a zero-sum game. It's actually looking beyond. That's one of the things about mindset that I like is, especially when Cameron, when you brought up 5D, is that it takes you out of yourself and makes you sort of see what's the local world look like, what's the national world look like, what's the whole world look like. You know, we don't live in this world alone, and you know, tiny little me, she says with a smile, sitting in Sacramento, where it's a beautiful day, I still have, you know, thoughts and feelings for Neville, who's in London, which is turning cold because of the season. I'm still able to look at Pakistan and wonder, you know, what is it that we can do to help and you know, bring up that mindset so everybody can make a good living, because it's there and we can think about it. But I also get overwhelmed with, I'm just one person. So there's a way of finding your place in the world where you can make a difference, and make a difference maybe just in your small corner, but that ripples out. And that's the part that I like to remind people, that if I make a change, it's going to cause you to make a change because of how we work together. And then you make that change and somebody else will make that change. And that change may simply be how you think about something. And that makes a difference, but we don't see it, because the other part of what we're taught is it needs to be tangible. We need to touch it. We need to be able to pick it up and say, I have coffee, you know, and we forget the power that we have in here. I think it was Elon Musk that described, at one point he said something about the world is one big video game. And he was probably speaking, you know, he was at an event and he said that, and he was probably speaking with a little tongue in cheek, but that sent my mind going, what if that were true? What if there's something bigger than us and we're pawns moving around? What would that mean? And, you know, that starts a whole different thought pattern, and that makes you think differently. And even though Apple is famous for their phrase, think different, the writer in me was like, add the ly, think differently, you know, because I still have this need to have the language work. And I get that, you know, little aside, copywriters have the right to break language rules. I get that. But at the time, I was a newly minted kind of editor in my job, so it was driving me nuts. Well, that driving me nuts made me start talking about the power of language that I would never talk about before. So those are the kinds of things that fascinate me. You know, changing our perspective just a little affects us in the very core of who we are. But that said, how do you get people to understand that they can define that very core of who they are? And they can define it differently than what their parents thought. And they can define it differently than what their friends think. And that's, I will say, it's the most difficult is when your friends think something and they keep pulling you back to what they think. And I know for me, I lost a little bit of strength when my friends kept saying, that's not what you're about. You know, and I would say, yes, it is. And it took a while, it took some struggle to get them to see me differently. You know, any insight on that? If we're going to change mindset, we're going to change people at their core, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would certainly go by that, because changing people at the core goes back to what Neville was pointing out, Jeanne, which is that when we grow up, we are born with a positive bias, and then something along the way happens. And I was looking up the contributions of late Sir Ken Robinson, and I think he articulates the tragic facet of our lives by saying things like, we are educating people out of their creative capacities. I believe this passionately, that we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it, or rather we get educated out of it. And I thought that this is something which has to be taken rather seriously, because he devoted his life to such ideas. And he said that creativity now is as important in education as literacy. So a lot to be said for that. And even in the East, we have philosophers like Iqbal, who, for instance, you know, gets to our core, and he speaks in admiration for young people and their potential by saying that I love the youth for their aspiration to connect and touch with, you know, discover the stars. And, you know, he talks about the cosmic and the magnificent possibilities before us human beings. And, you know, Rumi, for example, in the East says that you were born with wings. Why do you crawl? And I think crawling is a mindset. Not aiming for the stars is a mindset. And that shift has to come from the core and from the upbringing that parents like you and me and Neville and Carla, we all kind of need to work on this creative gift that kids come with. We should never, never take it out of them. Indeed, we should nurture them and encourage them to make mistakes, because if they're only making mistakes, that's the time when they learn. And as you rightly said, Jeanne, that you reframe the experience in order for them to relish the experience and do more, rather than be afraid and live in constant conformity with what is expected of them. And I feel that if one was to summarize, it is independent thinking we want to encourage in a highly interdependent world. You know, independent thinking in an interdependent world. And I feel that that is the way we can each add our voice. And when we have a shared vision or a dream, then we can work our way through conflicts and arrive at innovation, and there are lots of solutions underway which are coming to us. And every solution, by the way, brings with it new problems. So that is the cycle that we are in. And yes, a mindset that embraces change, mistakes, and failures, and one rises from them is really the essence of the conversation we are having today. And I think it is everyone's individual responsibility to become more self-aware in order to gain higher levels of consciousness.
I think.
Okay.
Go ahead, Carla. Go ahead.
No, Neville, I'll talk.
When you mentioned consciousness, and of course the consciousness bit is what a lot of us never get into. Lots of our behavior is unconscious. We do it because that's the way we did it before. So for instance, when you get into the car, do you ever really think about turning the ignition on? Putting your foot onto the right pedal? You know, you don't indicate to turn left or right. You don't think about it. It becomes a subconscious behavior. And this is where, you know, Sir Ken Robinson is a good friend of ours. You know, sadly, he's not around. And even worse, not very many people in education listen to him, which was absolutely crazy because he spent his whole life trying to transform education. And we then get into the arena of we're all connected. You know, there is, don't want to go too deep into this, but quantum theory has proven that we are all connected around the world. There is something, an aura, and we're connected millions of miles away in another solar system. And you'll see the physicists talk about this on a regular basis, because it's not a belief. They can prove it mathematically. They can prove it. And once you can prove things like that, it's very difficult to say it's wrong. But the other thing is, you know, there are some wonderful people out there that have come up with these great phrases. And the one that I think affects me more often than not is by Charles Swindoll. And he says, 10% of what is happening to you is really happening to you. And 90% of it is how you react to it. And it's that reaction. You know, if you tell a child, you know, don't do that, the child's saying, in their mind, they're saying, why? Why shouldn't I do that? Give me a reason. You know, if you say, actually, can you shut the door because we want to keep it warm in here? The child's not stupid. So you might have to tell them 2 or 3 times, but eventually they'll recognize that we shut the door to keep it warm. And then that will be fact and religion for the rest of their life. Before we went on air, you know, we were talking about, you know, kids that have this fact and religion and always refer to their parents as knowing absolutely everything, despite the fact they're now 34 years old and their parents are older. It's about time you grew up, you know. So, but we do, and we're very protective of our kids. I'm protective of my children. You know, I've got a few at that age and a few a bit younger. But there is a point in time where it's this word responsibility, and if we can touch on it.
You said the R word.
I know, it is the R word, but a lot of people just do not step up to the plate. You know, a great American phrase. They just do not get out there and take their due turn in society. They just wait for others.
I need to comment on something about that, because
go ahead.
I've taken it on the chin from several of my colleagues that parents, what they would say is, parents these days aren't teaching responsibility. Parents these days aren't doing this. And now that I'm a grandparent, I hear people still saying parents aren't doing. Well, the reality is this has been an issue since way before time that I'm aware of. You know, it just happens that we have more of a focus on it because we have the kind of media distribution that gets in front of people's face. But the responsibility issue has been an issue since forever. There are some people who can take it, and they're taught how to be, and then there's some people who don't, and that, there are choices that are made that make them stand out a little differently. It's like the discussions about millennials, when millennials hit the workforce, and all the derogatory things that I heard were amazing, but I would look at people and I go, I may not be an expert in demographics, but I do believe this is called the 20s. It's not about the millennial generation. It's about being in your 20s, when you're finally independent in the world and you're making decisions and you're trying to build your place in the world. You tend to be a little narcissistic, and that's normal. And it's the same with issues about how kids come up and show up in the world. That's normal that we have this issue. We need to change it, but the change has to come from everybody. And it's not one generation of parents that have screwed up, because apparently all of us in the baby boomers, we just didn't know how to raise children, apparently. I own it. I understand, because I didn't get the handbook, although I did tell my son several times that, this is in the parents' handbook, so just grin and bear it. But there is no handbook. So yes, responsibility is an important part, and that's, parents need to teach that. But I like what you said, the quote from Charles Swindoll, how you react to something, that's one of our superpowers. We get to choose how to react. We get to react emotionally and chaotically, or we get to react or to respond deliberately and thoughtfully. And that happens in a million different seconds throughout the day. Every step you take is a choice. And that's where responsibility comes. You get to be responsible or not. It's one or the other. You get to choose. Do I put the directional on so people know I'm going to turn right? Or do I wait till the last minute and just kind of turn right and screw up everything? Do I follow the rules and put my mask on when I go in the restaurant? Or do I cause a scene because, it's all about me? These are all choices we get to make. And that fits into our mindset, because the choice pattern becomes part of that muscle memory that tells you to put your foot on the accelerator, that tells you to turn the key. How you make choices is an important muscle memory. Do you want to be chaotic? And I do recall as a teenager reveling in that tiny spotlight that I used to get when I throw a fit. But hopefully I've learned not to do that anymore. I've learned to be a little bit more thoughtful. But that's part of growing up. My 2-year-old throws temper tantrums, because that's part of what he needs to go through. Now, I will tell you, I revel in it as he sticks his hand up like this, very dramatically, sinks to his feet, and then throws his head on the ground. Honey, that's a really great way to throw a fit. Thank you. The power of grandparents is we get to
annoys him even more. Saying thank you when he's throwing a temper tantrum.
I also follow with, that doesn't work at grandma's house. There's just, how you react makes it better or worse. When my son was a teenager and he threw temper tantrums like a 2-year-old, is the best way I could explain it. He was in the middle of one, and his favorite word started with an F, as you can imagine. And I looked at him, I was kind of dumbfounded, because, I can't force him to choose certain words, but what I could do was say, oh, and he said, oh, what? And I said, I get it. You're throwing a temper tantrum like you're 2. You're trying to tell me something and I can't hear it. Okay, let's try to figure this out. And I do recall him looking at me like, you're crazy. But the temper tantrum stopped, and we actually did have a conversation about something that was frustrating him. So a lot of it goes into how we communicate with each other. And if you have the mindset to listen and to allow people to be who they are, that changes how you react to them and how you respond. It's very, very powerful to think about 10% of what is happening is really happening. That's the power of our mind, the 90%. Fascinating. Carla, did you have something?
We've had all kinds of technical glitches going on today.
Okay.
However, when you were talking about education, what came to me is the teachers do not teach about mindset or even help a child grow in mindset. I got into trouble for encouraging children who were not working at grade level for saying to them, hey, you're doing a great job, because they aren't. They're not where they should be, but they are where they should be. And I think the educational system is a big problem for everyone when it comes to mindset and watching it and having it grow. And I am a little distracted because of some of the issues I've been dealing with today. But hopefully people are finding us. Okay, back to your conversation, which was really good.
Well, I have to say that I agree with you about the education system. I struggled having a child who was, I'm going to say it this way, literally really diagnosed with hyperactivity. He wasn't just somebody they said throw Ritalin at. I went through all of the screenings and everything. And what I found frustrating was having the ability to make the changes that were necessary so that he could thrive. And when I found the teacher who would work with me, that year he got straight A's. He did really well because she worked with me on changing how you taught him, because he didn't fit the norm. And that's one of the things that we need to look at children and understand that each one is different. And I get that we have to teach a standard set of skills. And it's hard to do that. But I don't blame the teachers. Let's put it that way. I don't blame the teachers or even the administrators at the schools. Teaching seems to have become a numbers game, and we do socialize out creativity because they have to hit the tests. And I know at least here in California, it feels like they teach to the test, and that misses out on a whole lot of what we could be teaching. For example, my son didn't get the non-college oriented training, the more vocational training that I remember being taught when I was in school. There was an auto shop, there was a woodworking shop. They don't have those anymore. And so we do need to do an overhaul and teach. There's some kids who are college bound and some kids who are not, and that's okay. There are some kids who are extremely bright and can pick up the educational data fairly easily. And there are some kids who struggle. I actually was one of those kids who struggled. I had a little bit of a reading issue and nobody diagnosed it, and it wasn't until I was probably about 6th grade when I realized if I go into a room by myself and I read out loud, that I get it better, so that was on me to figure out, which by some miracle I figured out, However, by the time you're in 6th grade, bad habits are in. So the thing about mindset for me, when I'm thinking about adults, is we have to be willing to brutally assess ourselves. And by that meaning, look at what is it that we truly believe? What is it that we're comfortable with? What is it that we really want? And where are the gaps and how do I get there? And that's not a type of thinking that a lot of people are comfortable with. But then you can make choices to go get help, talk to somebody, decide not to ever watch horror movies again because you're always afraid. You know, there's lots of things that you can change. I say that because after watching Halloween way back, I think it's like a 30-year-old flick. After Halloween, and I lived down the street from a mental health facility at the time, I was like, never again, never again. And I have not watched, I can truthfully say I did not watch any of the Friday the 13th movies because that's not something I wanted to put in my mind. And you know, I do have friends who argue with me because I say, I don't want to go see that movie. That's not what I want. I decided to put more positive things in my mind. And without really knowing it back in the day, I was making changes that I didn't even know that I was making. But, you know, fast forward to today, I can recognize that was the beginning of a pattern, a new pattern. You know, I started making real decisions about what I'm going to put in my mind. And I started reading books that were more positive than negative. I started reading novels because they were interesting and took me away to places that made me think, you know, I have this burning passion and it's on my bucket list. I will go to Ireland. You know, there's lots of things that we can do to change our mindset that don't even appear like a big change, is my point.
Jeanne, can we move to Kamran? He has been wanting to say something for a while.
Oh, easy.
Well, I just wanted to reflect on the keyword responsibility that Jeanne and Neville were discussing, and it triggered a methodology which I feel has some value in it, which is that it is only when we raise awareness of ourselves and others that, and through questions, because often we are smug and we think we're okay, we know ourselves. Ask people, do you know yourself? And the answer is, some people say, of course, if I don't know me,
You will.
So I say, oh, really? And now that is the I don't know that I don't know kind of a state. And then you ask them a simple question about themselves and aha, they become aware. And they become aware that they don't know. And I think that realization indirectly leads to the sense of responsibility, because now the knowing becomes much more of a need as opposed to something that one thought was okay. So awareness leads to responsibility, and it's only through responsibility that we become effective. And the growth part that we've been discussing through mindset, I mean, we don't grow anywhere if we don't grow in responsibility. The essence in any organizational life or societal life, it is by taking greater responsibilities that we grow in capacity and also in contribution. So awareness, responsibility, and effectiveness, I feel, and the awareness, you can never be totally aware. It's a phenomena that you just have to pursue. Then I was also reminded, as you were discussing choice, and Neville also talked about how we react and respond to 10% and the 90%. It reminded me of Stephen Covey, and he was interviewed in Time magazine around 30 years ago. And he was asked this question: of all the things that you have taught, what is the one thing that has left an indelible mark in your life? And Stephen Covey simply said, stimulus and response. That I realize that there is power in the space between the two. And it is what I do with the time and how I make the choice. That is what I need to exercise in order to. And imagine a man of his caliber, his impact, to distill all his wisdom into this very simple realization, which I have really stuck with. The stimulus is out there all the time. We're being teased, we're being attacked, we are being threatened, or we are being charmed. It's how we respond to it. And using our wit and conscious and deliberate choice, I think that is real power. And the other thing that he mentioned when asked in the interview, Mr. Kavi, you make a lot of money and you charge a lot of fees for essentially that which is so commonsensical. To which he responded, yes, indeed, what I teach is pretty much common sense. However, common sense ain't common practice. If it were, I wouldn't be in business. So managing the mindset, I feel, is also very much to do with a lot of common sense, which is very uncommon. And it is reminding ourselves of the basics, and which I think Neville does remarkably well. He doesn't go into rocket science. He utilizes simple metaphors, analogies, stories, observations that really resonate with people. And his program YP2G, for example, is a testimony to the fact that you bring in human skills in a way that people can relate to and benefit from. And I salute Neville's contribution. And I think as part of your legacy, YP2G is going to go places, man. And it is already making impact. I know it's slow.
It's always slow. Changing education, frankly, is the most difficult thing in the world.
Robinson was knighted. And despite the fact that he was knighted, he still couldn't penetrate this jungle as such. And then, of course, I want to conclude with saying ladder of learning. That, I think, sums up the growth mindset and also managing the mindset. Ladder of learning starts with us, in a state of unconscious incompetence. And then it moves to this realization phase where we are consciously incompetent. And then we determine to go into the domain of conscious competence. That is where we make mistakes, we try out new things, we fail, we rise and stuff like that. And then we end up in this unconscious competence where the muscle memory takes over. And it only comes from practice. And in this regard, I think the contribution in the book Blink and the other book, Malcolm Gladwell. I mean, he speaks about the importance of practice, how many hours of practice to attain world-class skill set. So that perseverance and perspiration that Jeanne, you referred to at the early part of the show is so important. I mean, if we're not practicing, awareness alone won't do it.
But just picking up on that awareness part, that's the start. Yeah. That is the real core of where we need to start. I mean, the MindFit process, YP2G process, comes from another great coach trainer that's come out of the sporting world, and whose name is escaped me at the moment. But he would say the purpose of coaching. The purpose of coaching is to raise somebody's awareness so they take action.
Yeah.
And that's all a coach should be doing. I mean, so you can coach anybody in any discipline, in any industry, at any age. All you're doing is raising their awareness. And fundamentally, we're not very aware. You know, as I remember one of the first Shakespeare plays I ever had the fortune to. I was bad at English at school. I was terrible. But I used to love Shakespeare, English literature. And for my GCSEs, O-levels at the time, so I was 16 years old, we had to study a book called The Taming of the Shrew. And I will remember some of the paragraphs in there till the day I die. And so Petruchio says, see what a beautiful sun is in the sky today, my dear. And his wife, Kate, says, that sun is the moon. Fie, woman, fie. It is a beautiful sun. And this was his attempt of saying, you will be aware of what I tell you rather than your own awareness. So if you're going to be a dutiful wife, remember, we're talking about the 11th odd century here. So where women, even in the UK, walked 50 paces behind the man, you know. So, but I'll never forget it. But we go back to this word awareness, because I do think it's a great place to. I noticed the time was sort of shot by today. But I sort of see. Sir John Whitmore was the guy that brought sports coaching into the world of business in the 1970s, and he wrote The Inner Game of Leadership with Tim Galway. So it's all about the inner game. And the first thing is raise somebody's awareness. You don't need to be a coach to do this. You can do it yourself. And a child does that immediately. So as they put their hand near a fire, they realize it's hot. Unfortunately, these days, we don't have fires. We have radiators and air conditioning. So you get too close to those and it just hits you. But there are awareness arenas where we can just literally raise our awareness. You know, if a car pulls up in front of you and you see the brake lights goes on, automatically you put your foot on the brake. Now, you haven't done that because you were taught how to do it. You've done it because someone said, emergency stop. And it's this muscle memory. And as Kamran, you say about, you know, the game, the aim of the game here is to be unconsciously competent. In other words, doing things all the time and get it right. And the only time we need to be consciously competent or incompetent is when things go wrong. But the majority of the people stay unconsciously competent. And they say, well, that shouldn't have happened. So they're arguing against themselves when actually it went wrong. So you need to find out what went wrong, not saying that shouldn't have happened. That was impossible, you know, which is true in statements, but it's not really going to help you get out of your rut. And I think that's where exactly.
Guys, this has been an interesting show, and although I was correcting some mistakes all the way through it, I want to thank you for coming and doing the show today. And I want to thank our audience. And mindset is something that we develop. And I agree with you, Neville, when you said in the beginning, it starts when we're born. When we're born, we're anxious to go and try everything. And everyone says, oh, you can't do that. Or, oh, you're not going to achieve this. And then all that negativity becomes a part of our thinking process. And we think, oh, I can't do it. Well, we need to turn that around. We have been here for over an hour. Neville, you're wonderful. So are you, Kamran and Jeanne, because I could not have done the background work that I was working on if you guys were not as intelligent and articulate as you are. So with that, we will be back on Tuesday with another show. I'm tempted to do mindset again because I missed most of today, but we shall see. And can we all wave goodbye? And can you guys stay for one quick second? Bye.
Bye. It's been fun.